Everybody Matters podcast. This show is an outreach of Barry-Wehmiller. Don't forget to connect with us on the web at barry-wehmiller.com, on Twitter at Barry-Wehmiller, on Facebook and LinkedIn, and check out our blog, trulyhumanleadership.com. I'm Brent Stewart, your host. Recently, our BW Leadership Institute rebranded itself as Chapman Co. Leadership Institute in honor of our CEO, Bob Chapman. Now, Chapman Co. is a leadership consulting firm that partners with other companies to create strategic visions, engage employees, improve corporate culture, and develop outstanding leaders through leadership training, assessments, and workshops. To date, more than 40,000 leaders in more than 600 organizations have felt the impact of Chapman Co. From startups to some of the most influential companies in the world, including American Airlines, South Africa's Coca-Cola Peninsula Beverages, Meijer, a grocery chain based in Grand Rapids, Michigan, the San Francisco 49ers, and the 2019 Stanley Cup champions, the hometown St. Louis Blues. And you can find information on their classes, you can find case studies, videos, webinars, and a whole lot more on their website, ccoleadership.com. You can also find them on LinkedIn, Facebook, and you can follow them on Twitter at @ChapmanCo_. And recently, Matt Whiat, one of the founding partners of Chapman Co., hosted a webinar on feedback. Matt talks about why we should give feedback to others, how we should give feedback, what is constructive feedback, and he also provides some exercises to give constructive feedback. And we edited Matt's webinar for length for the podcast, but if you'd like to watch it in full, you can go to ccoleadership.com. And now, here's Matt Whiat.
What percent of employees say they would literally work harder if they felt their efforts were better recognized? In other words, they were getting feedback on what they were doing right. What percent of employees do you think said they would work harder if they felt their efforts were being better recognized? 69% of people said they would literally work harder just if their efforts were being recognized. Question number 2, what percent of respondents agreed with this, that negative or redirecting feedback, if delivered appropriately, is effective at improving performance? So what percent of respondents agreed that if you get redirect feedback, if it's delivered appropriately, it will be effective at improving performance? 92% of people said, if you give me negative or redirecting feedback, if it's delivered appropriately, it will improve my performance. All right, next one we're going to do. Question number 3 here on feedback. What percent of Gen Y said they prefer on-the-spot recognition over a formal review? In this case, 80% of Gen Y said they prefer on-the-spot recognition over formal reviews. Just a couple more here as we start to begin this. What percent of HR execs believe performance reviews are not an accurate representation of employee performance? So in this case, you might even be thinking about your own last performance review and think, well, was it accurate of mine? So what percent of HR execs believe performance reviews aren't an accurate representation of employee performance? 77% of HR execs believe performance reviews aren't an accurate representation of employee performance. In other words, I'm giving feedback that actually is not correct. Hey, last question here, and we'll get into this. You've heard this phrase before, feedback is a gift, true or false? Feedback is a gift, true or false? Feedback is a gift, true. What if the feedback is not helpful? What if the feedback is wrong? Is it still a gift? We're going to get into that, and I'm going to come back to this question later on, but I want us to think about that statement and how if feedback is a gift, well, I don't know, why don't we give it more often? Why don't we take it in and receive it even better? Is the goal of giving feedback to change behavior? Is it to give advice? Is it a way to really document poor performance? Does it allow the leader to vent? In this case, when we think about giving feedback, I want someone to do more of something. I probably want someone to perhaps slightly do different, or perhaps it needs to be a real big change. Regardless, what I'm really looking for is someone to change their behavior. especially as a leader or as a teammate or as a colleague, I want someone to change what they are doing. And so in this case, the reason we give feedback is to change behavior. All right, so if that's the goal of giving it, then if I want people in my span of care to do more or do better or do different, basically to change, then I need to create the environment in which the message can be received. Now, I notice I use the phrase people in my span of care. A leader, their job is to care for the people that are working. And so therefore you won't hear us say things like the people, my direct reports, or the people that are in my direct span of control, because I don't control people. My job is to care for them. So it's a language piece, and I just want to call that out. Span of care. I want them to change, but I need to create an environment. When I ask you, where do you want feedback? 100% of you said, I want feedback at the intersection between caring personally and challenging directly. I just want the truth, but I want to know you give a damn about me as a person. As soon as I start asking, well, how do you give feedback? I have a whole bunch of context. Well, at work, what about this person that could damage a relationship? And do I know this person? Here's the interesting part. We do this work all over the world. And what we find is everyone, just about everyone, occasionally you find people who are like, oh, just give it to me easy. I'll take the sugarcoating. Occasionally you find a few people who are like, no, I want it aggressive. The vast majority, in the high 90 percentile, they want truth with care. And so the first part of this is, I understand there are a lot of reasons why you're not doing it, or what might be professional, or how familiar I am with the person. But in the end, the vast majority of human beings want feedback that occurs like the person cares about me and they're telling me the truth. So we're going to give you a formula that allows you to do that more often. Before I get into that, though, I want to show you some work. This is work by loosely based on Kim Scott's work. So Kim Scott wrote the book Radical Candor, and she was with Google for a number of years. A great book, and one of the people on our team at the Chapman Co Leadership Institute is actually getting a doctorate in her work and does a lot of work with her team. And so while the language has changed slightly, I want to orient you to is almost a heat map of your receptivity of the feedback you're going to give. I'm sugarcoating, just kind of gentle. So I would give you an example. My mother is somebody who both gives feedback as sugarcoating, and I give it to her as that same way. My brother and I were both in the military, and when we were deployed, when we would call home, she would ask how it's going, and we knew our answer was, it's going just fine, Mom. It's okay. And when she calls us, we know we have to ask a whole bunch of times to actually understand, is something wrong? And so my mom is one that kind of sugarcoats that. Aggressive on the hard end, that's just like, I don't know if I care about you personally, I'm just going to constantly be challenging you. And the truth with care, that's the most receptivity of this. I'll give you an example of where sugarcoating actually doesn't work out very well. I have a daughter, and she plays soccer, and she plays midfield. And as those of you know, in soccer or football, depending on where you are in the world, the midfield kind of controls the game between defense and offense a lot of times. And she had a pretty poor game during the finals, and she has kind of a poor game, and they lose, and they're still in the tournament or the finals. So the next day we're getting ready to play. And, being the dad, I'm going to give her the good, it's going to be okay. We're going to do a great job. And so I'm giving her the pep talk. Hey, you're well fed, you're well trained, you're going to go out there, you're going to have a great game, et cetera, pretty much sugarcoating everything. So I give her that, and I come back to the sidelines. My wife says, what did you say? And I gave her the whole thing. I said, well, I told her she's great, she's going to have a good game. And my wife says, well, that's not very helpful. Does she know that she actually didn't play very well yesterday? And the reason that when she didn't play well, the team didn't exactly win. I said, no, I didn't tell her. We need to go out there and tell her that. So it's like the reverse walk of shame. I'm out there, the kids are all getting ready to play, and here I am, my teenage daughter, and I'm walking out there. And so I stop, and you can see my daughter's looking around like, please do not be coming up here to talk to me. What are you doing? I see her looking like, what are you doing? We're about to start the game. So I come out to her, and she goes, what do you want? And I said, well, your mom asked me to tell you. And then I gave her the feeling. She's like, yep, you're right. I know I'm going to have, I got it. We're going to have a great game. So the point was, me being on the soft side of this wasn't helpful whatsoever. And she could really handle that truth. It just in a heat map. And I understand that some of you be like, no, I need to give it more aggressively for some people, or sugarcoating. Just remember, none of us wanted to provide context when I asked you how you wanted it received to you, given to you. As soon as I started asking about family or group or work, now I start to have context with it. I'm going to give you a formula that allows you to give that truth with care mark. Really, it's about creating the environment. And if I want someone to change their behavior, I'm literally trying to create an environment that they can motivate themselves. I know there's a lot of science behind this. I know there might be a lot of, we just need to motivate people to do a better job or do something different. And the truth is you can't do that. As in the military, this is a little of the dark side, I'll give you a light side, but in the harder edge of this, in the military, during our special forces or some of our senior, more leadership type of positions, during our training, there'd always be an opportunity we would have for people. I want to know whether people want to be there for the right reasons. This isn't a story about military, it's just a story about people. And so in training, what we use temperature, hunger, and sleep. And so when you're tired, you're hungry, and you're cold, that's when we're going to give you an out and say, here's an opportunity. We have a great, nice, warm hotel room and a bed, warm everything. That's just, you want to quit? I'm not telling people to quit. I'm just creating a different environment for them to say, yeah, actually, I do. And the purpose wasn't to get them to leave. It was just to create a different environment to see who actually wanted to be there. On the good side of this, can't motivate another person. You can only create the environment in which they motivate themselves. So it's a very real example. My vehicle, the car I drive, is not for sale. If you want to wire me through, one of the programs, you can just send cash, whether it's PayPal or whatever. If you want to send me 2 times its Blue Book value on PayPal, suddenly my car is sold and you have got a set of keys in your hands on its way via FedEx. And you didn't change anything. You didn't motivate me to do anything. You just changed the environment. So if we want to change the environment in which feedback is received, because I want them to literally change, then I have to create the right environment for that. It's 3 steps. Step number 1 is I need to ask for feedback first. Step number 2, deliver it in a way it can be received. And step number 3, the ratio needs to be more affirmative to developmental. I'm going to jump into these. First of all, David Rock, another one of our folks on staff here at the Leadership Institute, is certified with the Neuro Leadership, and David Rock has this great quote about asking for feedback. It's less threatening for both sides. In other words, who the person is and who the leader is. People can ask for feedback as often as they like. Employees can solicit from multiple people throughout the organization and really get more accurate and valuable feedback on their performance. Even by asking, they can get the very specific feedback they need. All right, nice factual, almost academic statement. Here's the cool science behind this. I asked you about, is feedback a gift? And you all said yes. And what I would offer is feedback actually isn't the gift, especially if it's not delivered in a way that you understand it or can act on it. The actual gift is asking for feedback. Literally asking someone for feedback and asking for them on their opinion of something is a reward. And if we think about this, it makes sense. You're valuing me, my thoughts, my intellect, my ability to present something to the organization just by asking me. The other part that happens is you display the leadership characteristic of listening, because it forces you to say, I'm interested in your feedback. Now someone's talking and you're listening to it. So number 1 in creating the right environment. Remember, I want someone to change. So number 1 is I'm going to create a pathway of that care. And the way I do that is by valuing them, by asking them for their feedback. All right, next one, deliver the feedback in a way it can be received. Deliver it in a way it can be received. In this case, we're going to use this formula: situation, behavior, and impact. All 3 of these things need to be present. I don't care what order they are, and the more specific we can be, the better it is for the recipient. This is the formula: situation, behavior, and impact. So let's jump into this. I'm going to show you what a formula looks like the wrong way and one that's much more specific using all 3 of those. So incorrect example: Thomas, you are always late to meetings. It's rude and not fair to the people who made it on time. The problem is I'm a little bit vague. I'm judgmental in the rude thing and a little bit inapplicable. I don't know what to do with this. The correct example would be this: Thomas, during the Monday morning meeting each week, that's the situation, you often arrive late. It's just a behavior. You often arrive late. As a result, here's the impact: we miss out on your thoughts and often have to repeat agenda items. The impact allows the context, and in this case, you can see it's both about I value your thoughts and I miss out on them, and we miss out and have to repeat agenda items. Those are the 2 examples. So I'd like you to think of someone that you could give feedback to, and not necessarily developmental. Not just necessarily developmental. In other words, if I wanted to tell someone they were doing a good job, instead of saying great job, I can also use the exact same formula: situation, behavior, impact. And by using those three aspects, I can give affirmative feedback, what you did, what the behavior was, what the impact was. So I want you to think of someone you'd like to give feedback to. Now I want you to think about, in what situation does the behavior occur? In what situation does the behavior occur? In this case, I want you to think about, is it in specific scenarios or is it all the time? Is it just when someone's stressed out? Is it just when a specific person is there? Is it during just specific meetings, or is it just before you have your coffee? All right? Think of someone you'd like to give feedback to. Situation, the behavior, and the impact. First is the situation, very specific. Next, what specific behavior do I want to acknowledge or identify? When you're late for work, when you speak to customers in that way, when your hours are not turned in Friday, where feedback goes off the rails, where it starts in on a fight or where there's emotional fallout is where we mix up the difference between judgments and behaviors. Judgments and behaviors. When I'm in judgment land, this is fight town. This is feedback that ends like the maiden voyage of the Titanic, the Hindenburg landing, whatever kind of disaster you want to put in your mind, this is where feedback goes off the rails. All right, the last one here. The last one is a ratio. And I know there's a lot of different studies on this. It's 5 to 1, it's 3 to 1, it's 7 to 1. Here's the main point. Let me back up. You were probably promoted into a leadership role or where you are because you're a great problem solver. And problem solvers, like myself, no different. I look for problems to solve. I do. I look for things that are going wrong. And I also, if you wanted to spin that in the positive sense, I look for things that can be improved. And so a lot of times I have to resist the urge to just go in and give a whole bunch of developmental feedback constantly. You become like the critic constantly. I'm going into a new area. This is wrong. This is wrong. This needs to be changed. Now I'm just giving feedback on what needs to be developed or needs to be improved. If I haven't created the part about, I'm going to also catch you and I'm also going to point out what you're doing right. This is where people would say, for X amount of time, I've been doing it all right, never heard a single thing, and then I do one thing wrong and I'm getting a whole bunch of feedback on me. This is why it doesn't live well. And remember that heat map I showed you where care personally and challenge directly. I'm going to be in the aggressive side of all I'm doing is giving developmental feedback messages all the time. Importantly, I'm not saying that we have to go around and give everybody a trophy and everybody gets a high five even if they're not doing their job. All I'm saying is, if you want to create a pathway of respect where people know that you care about them, I need to also make sure they know when they're doing things right. And I'm going to use the exact same formula: situation, behavior, and impact. As I do that and I'm catching them doing those things right, and I'm constantly telling them you're doing a great job, I'm recognizing you for your contribution. Then when it comes time that I need to say, hey, here's something we need to adjust, and they're just much more receptive to that, as you or I would be. The other part is it increases trust. One component of trust is compassion. Does the person care about me? One way I can tell someone that I care about them is by telling them when they did a great job. And by not just saying good job, but getting very specific. All right, after you deliver the feedback, importantly, number one, listen. There's a lot of reasons to do this, but it's probably when we work around the world and I'm doing work with either senior leader teams or individual contributors, when I ask people, what do great leaders do? Well, almost number one will be listen. And so the first thing you should do when you deliver the feedback is listen. The next one, it could just be in being in a coaching situation. I'm just going to ask you some open-ended questions about how you're feeling about this or what you think about the feedback. I'm going to provide some time and space if needed. I'm going to ask for their feedback. Hey, here's the feedback. What do you think? Let them provide some feedback back. It might be like, wow, this is really tough. I'm going to have to think about it. Or I really appreciate it. Or the last one here, it's always great, especially if you're in a leadership position, to acknowledge that perhaps you could be wrong. I will tell you, I was running a small think tank, and I had a gentleman who I'd hired to be a speechwriter, very smart, very capable person, pedigree education, impeccable record, just a really great thinker. And he was supposed to be a speechwriter. And I could tell like the work wasn't being turned in on time. It wasn't what I thought it was going to be. He was kind of critiquing the rest of the team. The dynamic of this small, tight-knit team, about 20 people, was starting to erode. Now our customers are not happy with me. And so I did everything I've talked to you about. I did entirely the wrong way. I just called him in, pretty much said, I'm going to fire you unless you say yes, sir, to all the following response. I just started asking him questions. And I just started making statements. You're going to stop your critiquing. And he would say, yes, sir. You're going to start turning your work in on time. Yes, sir. And I just lit into him. Like I'm on the aggressive scale, and I'm not even talking about what his behavior is. I just said, you're wrong. I'm right. Here's what you need to do. And so I listed out all the requirements of the job and what he was doing wrong. And so then at the end, there's a pause. And I'm usually kind of the happy guy. Like people don't really see me too angry. The whole team is hearing me outside my office chew this person out. And so I'm sure they're all like shell-shocked, like what's going on here? He is too. And at the end, I said, so what do you think? And he said the phrase, do you have any idea how daunting it is to look at a blank sheet of paper and know that what I write is going to be on CNN by the end of the day? He never had any training on it. I didn't train him on it. So here I was giving him all this aggressive feedback about how he needs to perform better. And I realized I had equated a lot of his background with his ability to write speeches, and he just wasn't trained in that. So that last one there, I acknowledge that perhaps you as a leader giving the feedback, you could be wrong. So those are the steps after you deliver the feedback. One of the questions that came in from the last webinar was, hey, but what about the experience level? Like, shouldn't we change this? And this is a really interesting question. And there's some, I think we'll adjust the next webinar we do on feedback to show this. Studies will show, and a lot of research shows, that when someone's learning a new skill, in other words, when they have a new job, they need a whole bunch of, they need to build their confidence up. They're new at it, they're making mistakes, and so what they need is a lot of affirmative feedback. Hey, good job on this one, good job on this one. As someone gets more skilled in their job, what they actually want is more detailed feedback on how they can improve. And so if I were being ridiculous about this, I would say probably LeBron James, who's a basketball player in the United States, does not need feedback on he dribbles the ball really well. He probably wants some really discrete feedback on, I don't know, a triangle offense or something, strategy within the game. But the question was, how do I adjust the feedback on the experience level? Man, increase the amount of affirmative feedback you have when someone's brand new at something, and then get much more refining your developmental feedback as they get the skill going, because that's what they really want, is they want to get better at that. Okay, let's see some other feedback here and other questions. I'm going to read some of these off. Who do you think should be the first movers in creating a feedback culture by asking for feedback? Senior management, i.e. if they don't ask for it, why should I? Great point. And the answer is, I think if we are waiting for senior management, and I mean this sincerely, if you're waiting for senior management to do something, I honestly, in the work that I do with organizations around the world, I think this is where we find organizations that are kind of stagnant. And so I'm not trying to be Gandhi here, be the change you want to see in the world, but I would offer, if you're an organization and I have a senior leader team that's willing to, absolutely, I would say senior leaders, you are going to start asking for feedback. You're going to run a survey, you're going to run an online survey, and we have one that measures people, purpose, and alignment. And right afterwards, we're going to do some focus groups, and you're going to just ask for feedback. You're not going to make excuses. So if I were choosing who's starting this, that would be it. But if you were like giving me just a complete whiteboard of where I'd start with senior leaders, and I would start with your frontline leadership. About 80% of most organizations, the front line, that's where it reports into. And so I would have the frontline leaders asking for a lot of feedback. By the way, there's a direct correlation between asking for this feedback and a learning organization and an innovative organization. Great question. Let's see what else we have here. Any keynote thoughts on Marcus Buckingham's views on feedback in his book, 9 Lies, or perhaps this is a future debate? The part of Marcus Buckingham, so I'm not going to get into a debate or his book on 9 Lies, but this is what I do want to say. So Marcus Buckingham has a great quote about recognition, which is literally feedback on what someone's doing right. So one of his quotes is, you should find those people toiling away in relative obscurity in your organization. You could shine a light on them and hold them up. In other words, the people that are just doing the grind work day in and day out, I just shine a light on them and recognize them. So in a place where I would be in a complete agreement with Marcus Buckingham is, those are the people that need affirmative feedback. It's a reason why if we're doing any events with any third party, they're a catering company or they're a restaurant, I'm going to make sure we're pulling out the staff and thanking them in front of everyone. Here's the situation. This is behavior exhibiting for us, the care, and this is the impact it has on this meeting that we're having every single time. every single time. Those are a good example of people that are toiling away in relative obscurity. Okay, do we have a culture of asking for questions but actually not listening to it? How can one change that? Oh, this is a really good question. So the question is, if I have a culture of asking questions, but actually we don't listen to it, how can you change that? That's a pretty deep one, and it could go into several levels here. That's a tough one just to answer succinctly. I know I'm not trying to make it very simplistic, but I know in our organization, the organizations that we work with, it becomes very individualistic. And so if I'm in a meeting, especially the senior team, and I'll see that, I'll literally say, can I call your attention to the situation? Can I call attention to this is one of the meetings we're having. You just had a frontline leader who is closest to the work, and they were talking to you about some possible improvements. That's a situation. The behavior I saw from you all is you immediately open up your computers and were typing. I know one of you was doing email. That's the behavior. The impact of that I see as an outside consultant, and you're paying me money to be here, the impact that I see is frontline people that are closest to the work, they're not going to give you their ideas. Without their ideas, you're not going to improve in your organization. So unless you change your behavior when people are trying to actually ask you questions or to give input to you, then you're not going to get those great answers. And no matter how much you spend on a consultancy, it will not change. And so I would go right back into this behavior, one episode, one situation at a time, where we see is all of a sudden, it's what's the magic bullet that changes this? There isn't one. It's one situation at a time. I'm going to focus on behavior and impact as discreet as I can. Okay, what else do we have here? Okay, I'm going to go to some Q&A. I fully support, this is another a question here. I fully support Everybody Matters and trying hard to build it as office, but I am told to stop because it's not my job. So it's bothering me. The CEO wants change management. The lowest level wants it, but the layer between us is holding us back. I am struggling. Any advice would be great. Okay, here's my advice. Hire Chapman Co Leadership Institute. We will come in and we will fix them all. That's the easy answer, right? That's a tough one. I'll be honest with you. I think number one is you definitely, for work we do, if we want to see some momentum, we need some kind of C-suite sponsorship. So the fact that you have a CEO that believes in this, I think it's very powerful. If I were in your shoes, and I'm not trying to give advice, it's just things to think about, that middle layer of leadership is always difficult because they're having to handle the strategic planning portion. They're having to translate, this is the goals of the organization, and this is how they actually get done. So the linkage between the work getting done and people in the C-suite saying this is what we should do. So they're in a tough position. And so it might be that they actually want the change, they just don't know how to get there. And so one piece I would offer is providing feedback to the CEO exactly in this situation, behavior, impact, but not saying it in a generic statement of, hey, I want this philosophy of culture, but I can't get it. I would be very specific on what's a behavior you see and allow that CEO to be more, allow him or her to be more discreet about, oh, that's a behavior you're exhibiting, that's behavior you're seeing. So next steps for all of you as we wind this up. One is you're going to ask for feedback from at least 2 people in your span of care. Ask them. You'll give them the gift of asking for their opinion, asking their input, ask for their feedback on your performance. Start to create that pathway. Ask for feedback from your leader on your performance. Hey, what can I do for you? But importantly, hey, what can I do better? What do you see in my performance? Perhaps it could be improved. Next one, write at least 5 affirmative feedback messages. The beauty of this skill set is it's the exact same formula. So if you want to get good at delivering feedback that is more directive in nature, just write it on the good side. It's the same formula. Write 5 affirmative feedback messages. I want you to write a couple, 2 developmental feedback messages. Importantly, when you do that, one thing I'd like you to think about is share that feedback message before you deliver it. Write it out, and if you need to change the name for HR purposes, whatever it might be, then change the name or don't even include the name. But share that feedback message with a colleague. Make sure you have the situation, the behavior, and the impact articulated. Tell the person a kind of a brief synopsis about what's going on, and again, deliver it to them. One of the key criteria of effective teams that are very effective, is psychological safety. And if we were to break that down and not get too sciencey on you, but basically it means teams that are able to ask for and receive help are more effective teams. They're higher performing, they meet obligations, they have a higher engagement scores, all of those things. determined, number one, by can I ask for and receive help? When we do this work, even from senior leaders to frontline leaders, just about every time someone will read the feedback message, someone else in the group will say, here's how I would change it, or here's where I think it misses the mark. And the person goes, thanks, that's going to make it even better. So I'm just offering, leverage the intelligence and the passion you have in your own group and share it before you deliver it. Lastly, when you deliver feedback afterwards, ask for feedback literally on your feedback. I know it's a little inception point kind of thing, but this way you'll get better at giving it. Hey, I gave you some feedback. Was it helpful? Were you able to act on it? Or was it confusing or vague or whatever it might be? But just ask for feedback. How was it? Nice open-ended question. Those are the next steps.
Thanks for listening to the Everybody Matters podcast. If you want to find out more about Chapman Co, go to ccoleadership.com. You can also find them on LinkedIn and Facebook and follow them on Twitter at @ChapmanCo_. And if you'd like to find out more about Bob Chapman and Ram Sizodia's book, Everybody Matters, The Extraordinary Power of Caring for Your People Like Family, go to everybodymattersbook.com. For updates on the book, this podcast, for a lot of great content and insight, don't forget to connect with us on the web at Barry-Wehmiller.com, on Twitter at Barry-Wehmiller, on Facebook and LinkedIn, and check out our blog, trulyhumanleadership.com. I'm Brent Stewart. Thanks for listening. And don't forget, Everybody Matters is the only business idea with truly unlimited potential.